Getting back to that breaking news we spoke about before the break, Fox 4 Sean Rabb joining me now with more on the latest. We had said before the hour that we knew that there was going to be retaliation. We didn't know whether it would be symbolic coming from Iran. Well, now we have a few answers with still what's been just a very mobile situation. So what's the latest?
It's a response that's not unexpected. Let me tell you what we know right now is that we know now that at least 10 missiles, maybe 10 to 14, have been launched by Iran. The announcement was made on its state TV, and it says it is its response to the American aggression. We know the attacks, these missiles went into Qatar, where there are U.S. military bases, and perhaps there are 40,000 U.S. military in the region, not that many in Qatar, maybe about 10,000 there. But we also know all of these missiles have been intercepted, those coming into Qatar. So no injuries, no casualties reported. They were not in residential areas, but towards the military base, the U.S. military air base there. So again, a response that's not unexpected. We also know that there were bombs launched into Iraq. Now, we don't know, we haven't heard yet if any of those missiles have hit any targets, but this is something that Iran had to do in the face of this attack by the United States on its nuclear sites in order to, if you will, save face with its own people on the public court of opinion. So here's what we again know right now. In Qatar, none of the missiles hit targets. They were intercepted. So no casualties, no fatalities, and apparently no damage in residential areas. In fact, the Iranians said this is not, Hannah, something targeted towards our friends in Qatar, but again, to the U.S. military there, and we don't believe they had any success at this moment. Now, the bigger question lies in what happens later. Is it one and done at this point? Is this their retaliation and they're done? Does the United States let this pass without responding to this, or does the U.S. respond and say, okay, we warned you not to do this? Because that was the warning from President Trump when he addressed the nation Saturday night, warning them not to...
Right, he'd called for peace.
Yeah, he called for peace, but he also warned them not to retaliate. So we'll have to see what the United States does now. Maybe it's one and done on both sides, and maybe we get back to the table of negotiation and diplomacy, or maybe it's a line drawn in the sand for both.
Well, and we do know, hearing from the leaders of the country, they had called their initial response of the attacks on the Qatari bases a mighty and successful response by the armed forces to what it referred to as America's aggression.
Right.
So will it end here, or is this going to be the beginning of something much, much longer?
Yeah, and more protracted and potentially over time deadly for both sides. We'll have to see. But right now, at this moment, we know there are no casualties, no injuries, no fatalities.
All right. All right. Sean Rabb, appreciate it. Okay, of course, we're going to be covering this story on air and online at fox4news.com. We'll have the latest also on our streaming platform, Fox Local. It is free to download. All of the latest updates on what we've said, obviously, has been a very mobile situation, so we'll be sure to update you there and keep you posted online as well. Okay, we'll be right back. Okay, we're going to continue our coverage of the latest news. We have video that now shows the missiles we were discussing that happened before the hour. These were Iranian missiles launched at sites in for Qatari bases for U.S. armed forces. They were warned that this might be something that could happen before, so they've been on alert.
And I think Qatar also was warned. Here's why. They closed their airspace over Qatar shortly before these missiles started coming in. They were aimed at the U.S. military base there, right? A base that President Trump visited back in May. So this is a direct message from Iran. And the way it played on state TV with military music playing behind and the announcement of the launch of these missiles and a direct response to American aggression, it is the Iranian leadership, the Ayatollah, it is their stand-up to say to their people, we will not take this without a response, and we have done so. The good news that we know at this moment, at least in Qatar, is that there are no injuries, there are no casualties. We've not heard yet any word from the missiles launched towards Bahrain also another U.S. military site. Again, some 40,000 U.S. military personnel in the region, maybe 10,000 in Qatar. Many have been moving around in the last few days. Let's see if that video is up. Here it's the video.
There we have it.
Of the attack on the U.S. airbase there. And you can see in the dark of night there in the sky, you can see, we understand maybe 10 to 14 missiles have been fired. Certainly not with the force or the power of what we saw happen Saturday.
And this is in Doha, Qatar. And those Iranian missile strikes you see on the U.S. military base there. Again, the initial report, all of these missiles were intercepted, like you've said, Sean, and there were no injuries. Now, Iran had vowed to retaliate. Days ago, the U.S. went after 3 Iranian nuclear sites, and that comes several days after Israel did the same on Iranian soil. And we've heard a lot of different responses, right? So Israel has really commended the U.S. entering this now back and forth conflict. Other nations like China and Russia have condemned this move, saying they do not need a regional war. They support what Iran has been doing with its nuclear program. There's been a lot of back and forth, but it's interesting to see how different sides have really panned out in this and how they might act. It doesn't seem like China would be interested in entering a conflict like this. Russia is occupied with a conflict of its own.
Russia's got its hands full, and yes, there'll be talk from President Putin, but I would be surprised if Russia delved into this crisis in the Middle East. China, at one point last week, President Xi calling for a de-escalation of all that we saw transpire. Of course, we would also expect condemnation of Israel and the U.S. in this act from those two states, China and Russia.
Right. Not unexpected coming from the two of them that have been notable supporters of the Iranian regime and what they've done there. But U.S. policy for several decades has been that of a de-escalation. And what we're hearing now from Chinese counterparts and Russian counterparts, that what we want to avoid at all cost, the U.S. stance has largely been, is a regional conflict, something that's much larger than the U.S., than Israel and Iran going back and forth. Now it's become something different.
And it's still my opinion that the United States wants to avoid that as well. Don't believe we want to get mired in another war protracted in the Middle East. Certainly, most of the world agrees that there cannot be nuclear, the ability to make a nuclear bomb there. And so the hitting of these 3 sites, we don't know exactly yet the total amount of damage, the severity of the damage, but what we do know is there has to be some interruption of their process at those 3 nuclear sites, simply because these bunker busting bombs, they hit their targets. They hit their targets. And then don't forget, there was the onslaught of Tomahawk missiles from the U.S. submarine on one of these 3 sites. So there has been significant degrading of their ability to produce a nuclear bomb at this moment. The real question now is, does it stop with what we see from the Iranians today? Or does the United States respond because they feel they must, because the president said don't retaliate against what we're doing?
Yeah, and we are awaiting a response from the White House to these moves. They had many conversations about it. It was not something unforeseen.
Right.
Thankfully, again, no reports of any injuries at this point, but it will be interesting to see how the White House responds. Will Trump say, hey, this is where we wanted to end. We solved what we wanted to do, and now we can keep it here, rather than prolonging and perhaps increasing the scope of what could be something much more destructive.
Yeah, and we'll see what Iran does. Is Iran done now with these missiles? Certainly it's not at the same level, same magnitude of what we saw on Saturday night, but it is their response. And does this satisfy the need for them to say that we are defending ourselves as a nation? We will not just roll over and accept the U.S. aggression. We fired back. Does it stop there? Listen, 10, 14 missiles, if that's their onslaught, then they don't have the wherewithal to withstand what else could be coming from the United States if our leaders so chose for that to happen. As the president said the other night, if you retaliate against us, we'll attack you in the future, and it'll be far easier now. What we saw was military brilliance. but what does it portend now on both sides?
I want to talk a little bit about the political response and what we've seen from Texas lawmakers, other national lawmakers. Initially, when the United States went after those 3 Iranian nuclear sites, President Trump was largely applauded by his Republican counterparts who said, we support what you're doing. We are in line with this. This is something that is beneficial for everybody in this nation. How do you think the response might change, if at all, now that we know what this retaliation has at least started to look like?
Well, we'll have to wait and see. What I know is that we immediately had a majority, pretty much along party lines. There were Republicans coming out applauding. There were Democrats questioning and challenging, saying this should not have been done without congressional approval. There were 2 Republicans who have spoken out in the last 48 hours, an Alaska Republican and a Kentucky Republican, who now the Kentucky Republican faces the ire of Donald Trump, because he spoke out against what has happened. But Senator Cornyn, Ted Cruz, Ken Paxton in our state, Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett on the other side of that, saying this should not have happened without congressional approval. We should have known in advance. So I think it's going to be a divide along party lines. Now, what happens if how many people, if people are injured, if people are maimed, if U.S. soldiers lose lives, if the people back home, if the constituents begin to change their flavor of appreciating and liking what has been done, then I think we'll see maybe some voices kind of soften in terms of supporting this effort. But the support that our president has is uniquely different from previous presidents, historically speaking, to take these kinds of actions unilaterally, and that's what we've seen happen.
It would obviously be too soon to tell what Iran might do next, but I do think it is telling perhaps that this might have been more of a symbolic response, that it was within the Middle Eastern region. They're not looking at anything on U.S. soil that we know of, or anything outside of the region. And I think that might be an indicator of what Iran might do next. But we haven't heard word from them about how they're describing this latest attack. We only heard the first one about the Qatar Air Force base, the United States base there. Right. But we still haven't heard anything yet.
Well, and I think we have to remember a couple of other things. Homeland Security issuing a worldwide alert to the United States citizens who might be traveling internationally. Okay, there's the alert about the threat about cyber attacks on infrastructure, and whether it's true or not, Iran suggesting that they would tell terror cells within our country to stand up and respond to this. So whether that's talk or whether it has teeth, we'll have to wait and see if there is some sort of attack within our country from a small group or an individual with this strong allegiance. We'll have to see. Yeah. It could be political rhetoric that we have terror cells in the U.S., and if we give the word, and we're going to give the word, if you attack us, they will stand up. We'll have to see about other types of retaliatory responses. But right now, we have one in 2 locations, right? Qatar and Bahrain. We'll have to see what's happening in Iraq. We haven't heard there yet.
All very preliminary at this point. And good time to mention, too, we have the Fox Local app. We will have continuing coverage there, as well as on our website, foxlocal.com, the Fox Local app, fox4news.com. The Fox Local app is free to download. And I know you will be on top of this all throughout the day as well, Sean.
We will. We'll expect some word from our nation's leaders anytime now this afternoon.
All right, Sean, thank you so much. Thank you so much for sticking with here on Fox 4 News at noon. We'll be back here at 4 with the latest on this situation.